Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning in to GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, we are picking up with The Boys in Season 1, Episode 5. This episode starts with A-Train arriving at where Popclaw has been hiding out. Remember from our last episode on The Boys that since she had told folks about Compound V and everyone who had been guarding it has died, A-Train had to hide her before Homelander found out. So that is where we find ourselves at the opening of Episode 5. A-Train arrives where she's been hiding out, and she seems to be on some type of drugs, but he tells her that he's handled everything, and Stillwell says they can go public with their relationship, which is the one thing that Popclaw wants most in the world. But in order to do so, she has to tell A-Train who she told about Compound V. Up until this point, Popclaw has absolutely denied categorically that she has told anyone at all. But with this thing that she wants most in the world dangled in front of her, she goes ahead and tells him about the boys. She doesn't know their names or anything like that, but she describes them to A-Train. And he can't get out of her why she did it or what they have on her, but she goes ahead and admits to having told them. And he does have an understanding that they must have something on her in order for her to have done that, because they do actually really care about each other. So A-Train starts reminiscing with her about their first date and how instead of pretending like she wasn't that hungry, that she ordered a beer and a steak and a dessert, and that he knew right then that she was the one. And he tells her that he loves her, and then he shoots her up with an overdose of heroin. It's very abrupt, and he's very clearly not happy about having to do it, and he very clearly does love her a lot, but he is so scared of something that he goes ahead and does it. So we get to see rather quickly what it is he's scared of, and that would be Homelander, who up to this point has been kind of weird and crappy in some ways, but not overtly evil. Well, except for maybe shooting down that plane after that guy tried to blackmail Madeline for knowing about Compound V. So there's that though. That guy was blackmailing them at that point. And it's still kind of up in the air as to whether or not Homelander intentionally sabotage the plane going down. At least in that instance, though, Homelander seemingly had a reason for it. In this case, it is coming across as strictly being retribution. When he took down the plane, that was eliminating a threat against Madeline and therefore also Vought. It was protecting the secret of Compound V as well. But in this case, he's just ordering that Popclaw be killed just for having shared that information. It is vengeance and retribution. It's not just about stopping a threat, unless he's viewing it as, if she said it now, then she will perhaps tell others in the future, but it doesn't really come across that way. And Homelander gives A-Train a very weird narcissist pep talk that kind of involves a lot of gaslighting and double talk. He's acting like a friend, even though he knows that A-Train has had to kill Popclaw, and because he ordered it. And he tells him, "I'll always be watching over you. Always," while forcing him into a hug. So by saying that he'll always be watching over him, it's really more of a threat than anything. It's more of an, "I'll always be watching you." Like, I have my eye on you because you screwed up big time, dude. And he also makes a very weird dominance display by choosing to sit in A-Train's chair. And sitting there staring up at A-Train while A-Train is forced to just kind of stand there and present the information to him regarding what's going on with sorting out who is out there with knowledge of Compound V and so on and so forth. It's very uncomfortable. And we're seeing Homelander starting to stray more and more away from this image of being like Captain America in charge of the Avengers, where they're all really equals, but they look up to him because he has a strong moral compass. Whereas in this case, Homelander is just in charge of them because he was the first to develop superpowers, and that is it. A-Train knows as he walks away that this is a big problem, but he's so focused on himself that he doesn't really consider what that means for the rest of the Vought 7. He doesn't think about what that means for humanity or them going overseas. And understandably so. He's just had to kill the woman that he loves. But it's a lot that is unfolding in these very small scenes early on. We also catch up with Frenchie. And Frenchie is cooking a really nice meal for the unnamed woman who they have chained to a wall and cuffed. And he pushes the food over to her. He makes a really nice meal, puts it on a paper plate in this dive of a safe house, and then pushes it over to her with plastic cutlery on top of a plastic milk crate. And he sits down across from her and he's talking to her again, trying to let her know, even though she's not made any words at him, that he is trying to help her and that he wants to help her get the people who have done this to her, because they injected that Compound V into her and then imprisoned her without her consent. That's all he's really been able to glean so far, but he does understand that much. She just kind of stares at him in silence for most of him talking, and then tries to attack him, going at the end of her chain to try to grab him, but he does not even flinch. Frenchie knows he's exactly far enough away, and he's going to continue to be patient with her. And I really love this gentleness in Frenchie, as we know he's capable of great harm. He would have killed Huey had Huey gone and told his father or anyone else about them killing Translucent. That's why Butcher sent him with Huey right after they killed Translucent. But he also has this intuitive understanding of other people's pain in a way. And he is absolutely dedicated at this point to helping this woman in any way that he can. He put a lot of effort into her meal. He could have just gone to Burger King and got her a cheeseburger or something, but he carefully basted and lovingly cooked this meal for her, even knowing that she may well still try to attack him, as she does. We also see Huey and Annie together at Believe Expo. It's the Christian gathering that looks like ACL, Austin City Limits Music Festival almost, and it has soups at it. So Ezekiel and a woman with wings are there, and it reminded me of Angel from X-Men, and what he might have been assigned to do were he in this universe of the boys rather than in X-Men. Although Angel's family was in politics in the X-Men universe, this is more of a religious gathering, but it is still political in nature as well. And I really enjoy seeing how they frame this. It's not just about being a superhero or being religious or being political or being a celebrity. It is all of those things. They are special guests at Believe Expo, even the folks who are not normally in the circuit like Ezekiel and the woman with wings are. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to catch up with what Annie and Huey are doing at Believe Expo. Stay tuned. You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Before the break, we were talking about where Popclaw, A-Train, and Homelander stand at this point, and we see that a lot of the characters are now also at the Believe Expo. So we see Huey and Annie together there, and Annie is in her old family-friendly Starlight costume, telling Huey about how she grew up working the circuit of these types of Christian soup expos, and she lists off several of them. And Huey is kind of amused by what's going on around her, but he knows that all these people seem to really like her, and it just further reinforces his concept that Annie is a good person. So even though Huey tells us that he has lapsed from church, but he's spent his time in Sunday school, he's walking around and seemingly having a good time with her until he meets her mom. right after Huey meets her mom, Ashley, the marketing woman, comes over, and Huey has to quickly turn around and pretend to peruse some offerings at a nearby tent. So it's a vendor tent, really. And he's having to pretend to look at these because Ashley had accompanied A-Train when Huey met him at Vought to sign the papers about Robin's death, the NDA and the $45,000 check that Huey had ultimately ripped up. So he wants to make sure that Ashley does not recognize him and turns around. But then as Ashley and her mom walk off, Annie turns around and asks if he wants to come with her to this event where she'll be speaking to the teens. And he says that he'll catch up with her later. Now we also see that MM and Butcher are at the event as well, and Huey has caught up with them. And they're scoping out the security at the event. Now this is very much a religious event, but there are also firearms everywhere. And Butcher makes a comment on how this is very American because you have the guns and God in the same place. And MM also points out that there are a ton of security cameras keeping an eye on everyone everywhere. So they're not going to be able to reach their goal of getting to Ezekiel by sneaking in anywhere or by forcing their way in anywhere. It is too heavily guarded and too heavily armed and surveilled, really, for them to be able to get away with what they were wanting to do. So we see that Ezekiel is on stage at this point. That's what they're watching from the crowd. And he's preaching that the Supes are chosen by God. And he likens them to Jesus Christ by drawing comparisons about being born with these godlike powers and being born to save these folks. The rhetoric is very strong and pervasive, and clearly also heavily orchestrated. It is image building and branding at its core, and that's what a lot of the show is about, as we discussed in our last episode on The Boys. It's about image and reputation, and it's largely really social engineering down at its most basic level. It's not just about selling them as Supes and that they can protect the people. They certainly are able to do that, but it's not about protecting others. That's just part of the image and the branding. It's really about promoting them as influencers and making sure that they have a hold over the people's minds, really. They want to make sure that they're embraced in the people's minds and hearts, which is why Annie is also there and why Homelander is there as well. You also see a lot of anti-LGBT rhetoric at this event, mostly in the form of signs, but sometimes also referenced by some of the characters. And that's really interesting in this regard because the crowd doesn't know this, but we have seen Ezekiel participating in some sexual activities in one of the soup clubs in the first episode with Huey and Butcher both. And we know exactly what he's kind of into. So it's very interesting and very clearly hypocritical. And that is also something that we see a lot in religion and politics, with folks who are figureheads of these groups publicly decrying homosexuality or bisexuality, anything other than heterosexual monogamy between married individuals. And oftentimes you eventually find that these folks are actually in the closet about their own sexual proclivities. The art imitating life in this example is very clear and very, very direct. So we see that this is what Ezekiel is like. We can only surmise what the others involved are truly like, and they are very similar to politicians and religious figureheads in modern day America. But we go ahead and see Huey and the others really trying to figure out how they're going to get to Ezekiel. And Butcher ends up assigning Huey to get Annie to get him in with Ezekiel in a one-on-one meeting so they can blackmail him into telling them more about Compound V. Understandably, Huey and MM both balk, agreeing that Huey is not ready for this. Huey also doesn't want to use Annie in that way, and Butcher calls him out on that, saying, are you afraid your fake girlfriend's gonna figure out that you're using her? But for Huey, it's not really her being his fake girlfriend. He really does care about Annie. He really likes Annie, and she's one of the few things in his life that has actually made sense and been somewhat stable and wholesome since Robin has died. So he's not comfortable with this on that part, and he's also not comfortable with it because, hey, he is still learning how to just stand up for himself when other people attack him and stuff. And I mean that verbally. He is not prepared to go in and try to blackmail someone. And MM supports him, and he's like, look, this kid's not ready. He needs preparation. Why is this the first that any of us are hearing about this plan? And it's very clear that Butcher has decided unilaterally that Huey's going to do this. And he's not ran it by Frenchie. He's not run it by MM either. And Butcher says that since Huey has now murdered someone, and that someone being translucent, that this should be a piece of cake. And he just kind of walks off. So neither Huey nor MM are convinced, but they reluctantly are going to go along with it. MM just kind of looks at him and is like, man, I know, but what are you going to do? This is the plan. He clearly doesn't have an alternative plan. No one can think of a better way to get in there. And it costs $15,000 to buy a one-on-one VIP diamond pass to have this meeting with Ezekiel, which I also found to be very relevant regarding today's interactions with a lot of celebrities. So you can go to these shows like ACL, where there are music festivals and everything, and it's a certain amount of money to get in. About $250 for the whole weekend is what we've paid in the past. But you get access to all of the music for that entire weekend. But if you want anything special, you have to pay a lot more money, and VIP tickets are $1,200 or so, if I am recalling correctly. They can be really expensive, and it's a prohibitive cost for a lot of people. And that's really the point, is to limit these one-on-one interactions. It's a resource scarcity type of marketing ploy, really, to make it seem even more special. But it's also feeding on word of mouth so that these people will go and tell everyone else about their amazing experience. Because it's rare and it has bragging rights, essentially, it's going to encourage more people to go and publicly talk about it. And that's going to encourage more people to want this rare, limited experience. It's consumerism, it's capitalism, it is Americanism in so many ways. And $15,000 is, again, satirical in a way for it, but it's just like these mega churches that we see today, where they have a whole lot of money, but they're also not entirely always helping people. They're not using that money for good. So, we're going to go on a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to catch up with Homelander and Queen Maeve. Stay tuned. You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And how Butcher has assigned Huey to get in with Ezekiel in the one-on-one meeting that normally costs $15,000 to blackmail him, more or less, and to use Annie as his resource to do so. Now we're going to talk about where Homelander and Queen Maeve are. So they're at a press conference / group memorial, really, for the 123 people who died on Flight 37. And they're standing on this stage with some other folks while everyone in black in the audience is in mourning. And Homelander is listing out the names, occupations, and where these folks who died on the flight were from. And the personalization of it is very much a marketing ploy. He has gone ahead and turned this into something that they can milk for convincing folks that we need to go to war and to really let the soups into the military to go overseas and address terrorists. And it's very much drawing a comparison to 9/11 and how we went to a war overseas based off of a plane hijacking and needing to get vengeance, more or less, on the folks who perpetrated this crime against so many Americans who lost their lives in this act. And regardless of where you stand on the issue of that particular war, it's very interesting in how they are drawing this line and depicting it in this case. For them, it's really a possibility. It's not necessarily saying that Iraq was solely about that, but it is saying, hey, sometimes people in power do crappy things. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you can use these types of instances and these tragedies and convert them into opportunities to get what you want. And it does make the people who are doing that bad people, because it's for their own self-interest. It's not really about protecting these lives of the citizens. It's not really about protecting anyone. We've seen Homelander call them MFers walking away. We know that Homelander does not actually care about any of these people. But Queen Maeve does. And we can see how upset she's getting as Homelander is really talking about who they were as people. And it's not even going that in depth. It's not intimate details of their lives, just so-and-so was a teacher from this town in Ohio, and so on and so forth. And she just can't really handle it. She starts having flashbacks to those people begging them for help on Flight 37, and she has to walk away. She does leave the stage. And Queen Maeve is a consummate professional. She's been doing this for a while with the Seven, for years in fact. We've seen that she's largely unaffected by all of the crap that her coworkers do. She's pretty ambivalent towards Translucent when she finds that he's in the bathroom naked, spying on her and Annie. And she just calls him a pervert and calls him out for being there and keeps walking. But for her, it's not that she is shocked or anything. It's a power move. She's really asserting dominance, I think, on Translucent at that point and going, hey, you may be invisible, but I know that you're in here and that's not going to fly with me. You're a pervert. And she just flippantly leaves the room at that point after telling Annie to never let them see her like that, because Annie was crying at that point. And I think also her calling out Translucent was more so to underline for Annie that it's not just the Deep who is problematic among this group of men that they work with. And that just because Annie thinks she's alone, or she thinks that someone isn't watching her, does not mean that she's correct. Just because you can't see someone does not mean they cannot see you. So Queen Maeve has largely seemed unaffected up to this point, but she is really struggling right now with this crisis with the plane. And we saw at the end of episode 4 that as she was walking away, she was really upset by seeing how Homelander was portraying this to the media. How he seemed to be turning this into a positive and turning this tragedy into an opportunity. And even though she's been professionally turning tragedies into opportunities on a small scale with these small crimes and making sure that they're televised and that her callers of them are televised, this is a whole nother level. This is a mass disaster with 123 people dead. This is a little bit too much, even for someone as strong as Queen Maeve, and she has to walk away. So she walks off of the stage, and Homelander's almost done when she does so. So she just goes to sit quietly elsewhere and be alone and away from the cameras. But once Homelander's done, he comes over to talk to her, and he's just like, hey, why'd you leave? And she tells him in true Queen Maeve fashion, oh, the only thing that I hate more than blubbering people are boring speeches. And she knows he's not going to take that personally, because they don't write any of the words that they really say to people for the most part. All of their interactions with the public, with anyone outside of Vought, are scripted. So she knows he's not going to take that personally, and she's like, the speech was boring. And she knows that he feels a similar way about it, because for them, that's their job. So he sits down next to her, and you can tell she just wants to be left alone, and he is largely responsible for the feelings that she's feeling right now. But he reminds her of a time she saved a kid by flinging a pin into the eye of the man holding the kid at gunpoint from 26 yards away. And this does a couple of things for us as viewers. It tells us about Queen Maeve's skills, about her accuracy and her precision. It's pretty straightforward what Homelander can do and what A-Train can do. We've seen Annie's powers. We understand that the Deep is strongly analogous to Aquaman. And overall, we get that Translucent is invisible and that Black Noir is somewhat of a ninja as far as I can tell. He is very skilled in fighting with knives and things like that. Whereas we've really only seen Maeve doing a little bit of hand-to-hand combat, and the rest of it has been Homelander stepping in and ripping out a guy's heart or zapping someone with his laser eyes. But we get here that she's very good with accuracy and precision, and she was able to get this guy from 26 yards away by flinging a pen. So if you think about firing bullets and velocity, you have to calculate for wind speed and those types of variables. And I imagine that you would have to do something similar for pens. So Queen Maeve is usually quiet and she seems kind of grouchy and reticent, but she very much is very skilled in many ways. We've seen her fighting regular folks so far, but Maeve has a lot of additional skills that the others don't necessarily have. Yes, Annie can shoot beams and stuff from her hands, but can she hit somebody that far away with a pen? I don't know. We saw that she's very good at bowling, but how much of that is how much Annie has bowled in the past, helping her to knock down those pens, and how much of it is her powers at that time. So this is telling us a little bit about Maeve, and it's also showing us a little bit about Homelander. So he is telling her this to kind of give her a pep talk and go, oh, you know, I know you're sad about those people who died, but he tells her that the point is that she took action in the instance with the person flinging the pen. And he says that line to her again. That's what I love about you, Maeve. So it feels really disingenuous for him to have said that to her essentially 2 episodes in a row. These are only a few days apart as far as I can tell. And he's just saying, that's what I love about you, name. It's almost just like he is a computer program or a robot / android, technically is what he would be. But it seems really robotic for him to be saying that, even though he's effusing it with a sentimental and affectionate tone. It's not entirely ringing true because he is overusing it and he is just really coming across as insincere. And he also states that no one wanted the plane to go down the way it did, but they have to make the best of it now, or otherwise it was all for nothing. So he's telling her, hey, if we don't change this tragedy into an opportunity, then, those people just died for nothing. And it's very manipulative and excessively opportunistic. But Maeve is also on the other side of this marketing machine that he works on. And so she sees right through it, and she's still really upset, and what he said has not helped her. And she just simply says to him, what did I tell you about boring speeches? And that really indicates to us further the relationship between Homelander and Queen Maeve, especially as we go along the rest of this episode. It's teaching us more about them together and them separately. All right, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to catch back up with Starlight at the Expo.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Queen Maeve and Homelander. Now we are catching up on Starlight at the Believe Expo. We know from our last episode that she was also really excited about doing this initially. We know she grew up doing the circuit and going to a lot of these Christian soup expos. But now she's kind of looking at the world around her as she's at this festival, and a lot of the vendors and the event itself have put up a lot of anti-LGBT propaganda. And we don't really know much about Starlight's personal beliefs or her personal sexuality, other than that she seems to be attracted to Huey and that she's had a boyfriend before. But we also know that she's fairly innocent as well. She's 23, and she didn't have her first kiss until she was 18 even. So this is a lot for her. But Starlight really seems to love everyone. She's very giving of herself and really open to giving people opportunities. So this is very upsetting for her, and that's what we're learning about her as a person. And she asks her mom, when all of this anti-LGBT propaganda started being displayed and having that agenda pushed forth at these expos, and her mom is just really dismissive about it. You can tell she's not entirely listening to Annie, and she doesn't really care about where Annie's coming from or that this bothers her at all. And she just goes, oh, it was always like that. And this continues with whatever she was going to be talking about instead. Everyone around her is very much just focused on themselves. But Annie arrives at the teen panel, and you can tell that she's really excited to be there. And the minister who is leading the panel, as they're sitting in this small circle in a tent with all these kids, tells them, I know that to you guys this is Starlight and she's a superhero, but I want you to still ask her anything that you want to ask, because I've known her since she was your age and was sitting where you sat now. And so that also shows us how much this means to Annie. She has really fond memories of this. And up to this point, she hasn't seemed to have had a problem with her very Christian upbringing. She's just a very sweet person and a very go-with-the-flow person for the most part, who, like Huey, also has had trouble in speaking up for herself. She's tried to speak with her mom several times now about what's going on with Vought and how she doesn't feel seen or heard or safe even, and that it's not what she thought it would be. But the only person who has really taken the time to listen to her is Huey. So she's going about this teen roundtable discussion, really, and she seems really stoked to get to share with these kids. For Starlight, this is really a be the change you want to see in the world moment. And it's becoming the hero that you looked up to as a kid when she was sitting in their places and looking up to whichever superhero was at the panel that she is now sitting at. So this is something that she's understandably very excited for. Sure, she's already one of the Vought 7, but that's turned out to not entirely be what she thought it would be. Heroes so far aren't what she thought they would be. Some of them are addicted to drugs, like A-Train is addicted to Compound V. I'm not sure if Starlight has recognized that yet, but she sees Queen Maeve not really caring about anything, and Translucent being a pervert, and the Deep being someone who is sexually assaulting women. And so that dream that she had aimed for wasn't what she thought it would be. So for her, this is kind of an opportunity to get a win out of this entire situation. And it's like, okay, well, this wasn't what I thought it would be, but this thing right here is in my control. I'm not scripted for this, and I can be honest with these kids and be the person that I needed when I was younger. And that's honestly my personal goal in life, is to be the person that I needed when I was younger, to be the change that I want to see in the world. And I very much strongly identified with Starlight in this situation, where you get into something and you find out that it's not what you thought it was. The shiny newness wears off and you take off those rose-colored glasses, and the disappointment is stark and sometimes absolutely gutting. And so then you find something else and you're like, maybe this is my win. This is another component of my dream. It's not necessarily a new dream, but it's something that is going well. It's something that I was looking forward to, and it's something that is an integral component of who I am as a person, only to have that rug kind of pulled out from under her too. They keep taking these pieces of Annie, really, until all that's left is this brand called Starlight. And so the kids start asking her personal questions, and one girl asks about her friend who is of a different faith. And she's like, what do I do? Would God want me to try to convert them or what? And Annie goes, well, Jesus also said, love thy neighbor. And it's very positive, very New Testament as a response. But the preacher turns it around and says, but Jesus and God also said that, part of loving your neighbor should be trying to protect them and convert them. So definitely still convert them. And it's really an all or nothing stance that happens in a lot of religion. But it's also happened to her a lot so far in the compromises she's had to make to be at Vought. Like when they demanded she wear the more revealing costume, and them only letting her wear this one today, her old one, because it's quote-unquote family friendly, when really what they mean is that it's on brand for the context in which she is set this day. So they go ahead and have this discussion, and she's more and more uncomfortable as time goes on. One of the kids asks if she's ever had a boyfriend, and she said that she has. And then she's asked whether or not she's had sex. And this is a Christian group, and it can be really uncomfortable in those situations, but the kids are brave and they're wanting to know real answers about things. Teenagers are curious and they are looking for role models. And so Annie goes to be very forthright and candid with them. And she's like, I think everyone hopes that the first person they're with is going to be the person. And the minister kind of cuts her off by shaking his head slightly and indicating with his eyes that she should lie to them and say she's a virgin because she's on the cusp of telling them the truth about her first time. And she looks uncomfortable, but she goes ahead and tells the lie. And she looks very unhappy afterwards. She's trying to keep her game face or her work face on, but she's just been told by a minister that she has to lie to the children. And she'd been so excited to talk to these kids, but now they've made her lie to them and also told them that they need to convert everyone they know. And this all or nothing concept that Annie has been living through recently is increasingly unsettling for her. They're picking and choosing as well which parts of the Bible to uphold in a way that doesn't feel very loving to Annie. It's a little Old Testament, and Annie is much more so New Testament, and she is increasingly uncomfortable. Annie is a very giving person, and she, in that manner, is kind of actually analogous to Jesus Christ in this scenario. Annie has given and turned the other cheek and tried her best to be a good Samaritan and to be honest with these people, even when honesty is difficult. But they're still out here putting forth this agenda of persecuting the LGBT community while also having her tell these children lies. One of those things is in the Ten Commandments, and the other is not. It may be in the Old Testament, but it is not something that is being uniformly applied, and that really is what is bothering Annie. There is hypocrisy in this branding, and she's saying that just like the Seven was largely branding and marketing and upholding an image, so is this Christian expo, this Christian belief circuit that she has been a part of her entire life. And it's really uncomfortable for her to see the similarities between the two. It's also very much a coming of age moment for her. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to catch up with Butcher. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Annie/Starlight's panel and how that went for her. She was not happy about it. But now we're going to talk about Butcher. And when we catch up with Butcher, he's eating some type of festival food and chatting with a minister, in which he's making the argument that if God is real, then he is a jerk. But he uses much more colorful language. And then he lists off things like war and kids getting cancer. And that's a common argument that I have heard over the years in philosophical debates about the nature of a higher power. And sometimes when that happens, it's people who are speaking from a place of grief and or anger. It's not even so much that they necessarily don't believe in God, but that they are outright angry at him, and it's easier to go ahead and just say that they don't believe. Now, that said, perhaps Butcher really doesn't believe, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't make any qualitative judgments on types of belief at all. As an anthropologist, I believe everyone is entitled to their own belief systems. But I really enjoy the philosophical position that it's really framed in. And it's really illustrating how true to life this episode is in regards to people's attitudes about religion. And I specifically mention that because I checked out the reviews of The Boys on Amazon Prime, and many of them are negative, and the ones that are negative almost entirely cite this specific episode as their reasoning. They refer to the entire episode as being liberal rhetoric and the like, which is interesting and kind of ironic considering the topical nature and content of the episode. You have a whole bunch of characters in this episode who are falling all across different levels of the belief spectrum. We have Butcher, who either is angry at God for what has happened to his wife, Rebecca, or he is just non-believing in general. We don't know where Butcher fell in the spectrum before something happened to Rebecca, before things went sideways and she just suddenly disappeared. But we know that he either A, doesn't believe in God, or B, he does not technically like God, I suppose is the way to say it. And I know I am using God in the capital G sense, and I am referring specifically to the Judeo-Christian God, as that is the one referenced in the episode. Now, as he's saying this, we also see MM being like, hey man, stop being antagonistic towards this minister. Not only is that problematic for why we're here, but you're also going to draw unwanted attention to us. And I feel that that lends some credence to his feeling that maybe he might believe, but is perhaps angry at God. Normally, Butcher is pretty mindful about what they need to do to protect themselves and to make sure that they are able to achieve their objectives. That's why they're not rushing headlong into confronting Ezekiel and they're trying to sneak in instead. But this is a little bit much, and you can tell it's coming from a place of grief and anger. Now, I do also think, though, that he could both be angry and grieving, but still not believe in any type of higher power at all. So, we see, though, that MM is Episcopalian, and so he's like, bro, cut it out. Like, not only are you being a jerk and you're compromising our mission, but you're kind of blaspheming. Like, that's offensive not just to the people who work here, but it's kind of offensive to me as an individual. And Butcher's like, yeah, I don't care how you feel about this. And then he really asks Huey about it as well. And he's like, do you believe in anything? And Huey says that he's not sure, but he thinks that there might be something out there, citing that it can't all be random. And so Huey is really the mandorla of their belief systems in a way. So we have Butcher, who claims to absolutely not believe. And we also have MM, who absolutely believes on the other side. And right there in the middle is Huey going, you know, I can't really say one way or another. I don't think that it's Morgan Freeman up there. He's saying he doesn't believe it's like a true personification of an anthropomorphic deity necessarily, but that there might be a higher power of some sort, although he is not sure what that looks like. And it's overlapping a little bit of each of them. But Butcher, in true Butcher nature, goes ahead and goes too far. And he's like, you're telling me that you think that what happened to Robin, a train plowing through her and just exploding her body, was an act of God? You think that there's a being out there who allowed that and perhaps even meant for that to happen? Are you saying that everything happens for a reason? And then Butcher just kind of walks off while Huey is still a little bit shocked that Butcher even said that. Because it is a bold statement, and it's also really upsetting. Not in that it's blasphemous, but in that it's insensitive to Huey's loss, largely. And Butcher just flippantly walks off. We do see Starlight as well at this point, voicing her discomfort about lying to the kids, to her mom. So this is the first we've seen her get back with her mom since she's really joined Vought. She's tried to have a conversation with her over the phone, but that hasn't gone very well. She wasn't able to get anything off of her chest. So she's taking this opportunity in this environment that she used to be very confident and comfortable in to talk to her mom about these changes and going, hey, Mom, they wouldn't let me tell the kids that I'd had premarital sex. Like, that's not okay that they made me lie to them. And she's like, well, what were you supposed to do? Tell them that you've done something that's against the Bible? And she's like, well, Mom, I don't know, but I know that I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to lie to them. And her mom essentially discounts all of her issues that she's bringing up and says, You have to be perfect. You're a miracle from God. You're my miracle. And it's not really comforting. It's just her mom really talking about her in a possessive way and almost stripping her of her individuality and personhood again. And she's been stripped of it in so many ways. In that conversation with the minister and the teens in the tent, and being told essentially what to say, even if it was just with his eyes and shaking his head, rather than it being a full script. Her words are not her own, and another piece has been taken from her, and now her mom is more or less doing that as well. So Annie's really not comforted at this point, but Huey walks up to them, and she tells her mom that she'll catch up to her in a little bit. So she's not been able to confide in her mom, and is hopefully going to be able to confide in Huey. And we have a brief cutscene where Butcher tells MM to keep an eye on the kid, and bails. He won't say where he's going, but he's like, I'm out. So Huey sees Robin again, just as Annie is opening up to him that this place isn't what she remembered. And this is a really vulnerable moment for her. But Huey is seeing the specter of Robin, and he very poorly segues into asking Annie for that $15,000 diamond pass to see Ezekiel, without even acknowledging her discomfort, and thereby increasing it. And she tells him that she can do it, but she looks sad, because not only is her mom not listening to her, but now the only other person that she has felt that she could confide in for the past however long it's been since she joined the Seven is now asking her for a very expensive favor, asking to meet her famous colleagues / friends. She's not really tight with Ezekiel, but he's asking her to pull some strings in her network to get him something. And overall, it's just making Annie feel completely used. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up with Homelander.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Annie's encounters at Belief Expo and how it's not turning out the way that she thought it was. None of this is what she thought it would be or how she remembered it. And overall, she's feeling very isolated, and like a lot of this is out of her control. So now we are catching up with Homelander, who has just arrived at Belief Expo for his special appearance. And he flies in and kind of gives his script to the folks. He delivers the script to the folks as he is walking through the crowd, saying exactly what he's supposed to say, and gets into the tent with Ashley, the marketing woman, and tells Ashley to get Madeline because he hates his speech. And Ashley looks a little bit bug-eyed and panicked and is like, Madeline is not here. I'm sorry, I thought that you would be aware of that today, but she's not going to be able to be here. I'm here to give you whatever you need. But Homelander really doesn't want to deal with anyone except for Madeline. And so he demands to know where she is. And Ashley tries to get out of telling him, but he really stares her down and is like, where is she? So the next time we see him, he is meeting Madeline Stillwell at her car as she's trying to take her baby in for a doctor's appointment. And she says that she's taking Teddy for a doctor's appointment. So I figure that that's perhaps where she is at the doctor's appointment, because she's getting him out of the car rather than putting him in. And it's a very tense conversation, with him voicing that he wants to be more of a John Wayne frontier justice figure in this appearance at Belief Expo. He says his script reads like corporate mayonnaise, and that he wants to really lean hard into this specific group of people's belief in God and how they don't like immigrants or foreigners, specifically really listing them and classing them as conservatives, as we would recognize them in modern day America. He's listing off all of these attributes that are shared by modern day conservatives in general in America. And so he's like, these people want something like John Wayne. Let me go in there and do that. So for him, this is almost an acting gig. And he's like, I hate my script. And Madeline argues with him that this is a televised event that folks in Washington are going to see. So he needs to stick to his script to make sure that it's as widely palatable as possible, instead of playing directly and solely to his base. And in this way, up to this point in the episode, it's been very much about religion and acting in general, but we're really getting to the heart of the politicization of celebrity and of life in general in America. This is just very political within the context of religion. It's a politicization of religion itself. And he refers to the Believe Expo folks as being his people. So he's saying, these are my people. Like, let me play into it. And Madeline is going, you could do that, but you should not do that really, because in this case, you need to be as palatable as possible so we can convince everyone, including the Democrats who will be watching, and the folks who are more into peace, the pacifists, who may be watching and are associated with Congress, into convincing them that this is a good idea. You don't want to go in there talking about justice and vengeance, because if you do so, then you are framing it in a different way that will not necessarily work entirely for us. Vengeance and justice is more of a conservative approach to it, whereas to get the liberals on board and the pacifists on board, you really need to go from an aspect of protection and perhaps even, as Madeline seems to be coming from, a type of approach in which we're really going to avoid any type of war per se without saying that, because America makes a lot of money off of the military-industrial complex. So they can't say that, or that will alienate the conservatives. But they also don't want to talk about this frontier justice John Wayne style, because that will alienate the other votes that they need. So they're very much politicizing religion. They are politicizing the deaths of these folks as well, because he's coming in directly from this meeting with the press, this memorial service for the people who died in Flight 123. And it's a very tense interaction. Madeline is more and more upset with him as it goes along, and he is more and more upset with her, until it rapidly degrades into him calling her baby an accessory, and Madeline firmly and angrily telling him that they need boundaries. And you can tell that she's trying to rein in her temper. But she's like, the script is fine as it is. I'm not just caving to whatever you want right now. I have rescheduled this doctor's appointment for my child 3 times, and I cannot do this again just because you don't like your script. So when he calls Teddy an accessory, that's really the final straw for Madeline. And she takes him out of the car and walks towards the building with him. And as she's walking away with Homelander for the first time, Madeline looks a little scared. He can't see her face, but as she's walking away, she's holding Teddy to her chest with Teddy's face over her shoulder, looking back at Homelander. And Homelander is just glaring in that direction. But you get the sense he's not glaring at her. He's glaring at the infant. And it's incredibly creepy the way it comes across. They did a fantastic job in making this super unsettling. And it's in little bits and pieces that we are being unsettled. Homelander isn't coming across as a villain all at once. He went from being a squeaky clean hero that did not participate in any of the debauchery like the others. There's no record of him being in the soup clubs. There's no record of him doing anything at all, really. There's just truly no record of Homelander. And we went from him being squeaky clean to him killing the man who was blackmailing Madeline and finding out that Madeline didn't instruct him to do that. He just did it because he thought he should to protect her. So he is really drawn to her and obsessed with her in a very weird way, to the point that anything that gets her attention that is not him is a problem. And that includes her son, who is under a year old. And he knows that. He refers to the baby as being an infant. And he's like, your infant is an accessory. You and I both know that. And is just totally undermining her as a mom and delegitimizing her for trying to be a mom while she is also being a professional. She is trying to have it all. And a lot of times in the world, women especially are demonized for trying to have it all, for having a family and a successful career. And folks think that if you devote your time to both of them, you're not going to be good at either of them. And so he is saying, you know, that's just PR. That's why you have that baby and you don't really love that child. And this is a sore spot for Madeline, as it is for many women. And it is unsettling, but I also really enjoy the way that it's portrayed. It's something that is not all too uncommon for women to experience in life and in the workplace, from their peers as moms, as well as their peers as coworkers. So overall, it's a very real episode, you guys. Everything in this episode is just kind of raw. Everyone feels very raw in this one. Queen Maeve is raw over the situation with the flight. We have Homelander feeling like he's not getting any attention. And we have Stillwell going, okay, this is kind of spiraling out of my control a little bit, and getting mad at him for referring to her child as being an object. Because that's truly how Homelander views the child, is as an object. He doesn't really care for normal humanity at all. Alright, we're going to stop right here with this episode. We're only about halfway through episode 5, but we will pick up where we left off next time. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.